At 2 o'clock in the morning, Ethan Brooks walked across the marble foyer of his estate and froze. A pregnant woman in a cleaning uniform was on her knees, scrubbing the cold stone floor, humming a song he had not heard in 16 years. "Lean on me." Her wrist was ringed with a fresh bruise. Her breath came shallow and uneven. And when she tilted her head the way only one person in his life ever had, his chest collapsed. The girl he had searched for through half his lifetime was right there, and she did not recognize him at all. The estate sat at the end of a long private road in the hills above the city, surrounded by old oaks and a wrought iron fence that had cost more than most people's homes. Ethan Brooks owned it outright. He had bought it 3 years ago, the week his company went public, and on the day he moved in, he had walked through every empty room expecting to feel something. He had felt nothing. The rooms were too large. The silence was too clean. He had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in East Detroit, where the radiator banged like a fist against the wall every winter night, and he had spent the next 20 years convinced that what he wanted was quiet. Then he got it, and discovered that quiet was just another word for being alone with yourself. He was 34 now. The financial press described him as private, disciplined, self-made words that meant he did not return calls and did not date publicly and did not laugh in front of cameras. The truth underneath those words was simpler. He had learned somewhere around the age of 12 that a black boy in America who wanted to be taken seriously had to be twice as polished, twice as composed, twice as quiet about whatever he was feeling. By the time he was a man, the discipline had become the personality. He did not know how to undo it, and most days, he did not try. There was only one person in his life who had ever seen past it. Her name was Naomi Carter, and she had vanished from his world in the spring of his junior year of high school. They had met when they were 14, assigned to share a desk in a music elective neither of them had wanted to take. She had laughed at his attempts to pretend he could read sheet music. He had laughed at her habit of humming under her breath when she was thinking. By the end of that first semester, they were inseparable in the quiet way of teenagers who have found for the first time someone who does not require them to perform. She wanted to be a teacher. She talked about it the way other kids talked about being astronauts, with that same wide, unembarrassed faith. She used to tell him he was going to build something one day, and he used to roll his eyes, and somewhere underneath the eye-rolling he had believed her because she said it like it was already a fact. He had loved her by the time he was 15. He had been working on the courage to tell her for almost a year. On a Tuesday in April of their junior year, he wrote it down in a letter because saying it out loud felt like trying to swallow a stone. He folded the letter into the inside pocket of his jacket and went to school the next morning, ready to find her at lunch. Her seat was empty. It stayed empty the next day and the day after that. The school office told him only that the family had moved. No forwarding address, no phone number, nothing. He kept the letter. He looked for her for years through old classmates, through social media, as it slowly came into existence through a private investigator he hired in his late 20s when he finally had the money. The investigator found nothing. Naomi had taken her mother's maiden name at some point, and after that, she had simply ceased to exist on paper. He stopped paying the investigator after 18 months. He did not stop carrying the letter. That was the man who walked into his own foyer at 2 in the morning and heard a song he had not heard since he was 16. He had come downstairs only because he could not sleep. He worked late most nights, and when his eyes finally refused the screen, he would walk through the house the way other men walked dogs, just to remind his body that it was alive. He came around the corner from the east hallway, and there she was. She was kneeling on the marble with a soft brush in one hand and a small bucket beside her, working a stain out of the grout near the base of the staircase. She wore the gray uniform of Crestline Cleaning, the company his housekeeper Margaret had hired the year before. Her hair was pulled back in a loose, tired knot. Her belly pressed against the front of the uniform, round and low, 7, maybe 8 months along. The wrist of her free hand carried a bruise the color of old wine, 4 small ovals just above the bone, the kind of mark fingers leave when they have squeezed too hard. She was humming. Quietly, almost without realizing it, the way a person hums when they are trying to keep themselves company through a long shift. The melody crossed the foyer and reached him, and his body understood it before his mind did. Lean on me when you're not strong. It was the song she had hummed in their music class on the first day they ever spoke. It was the song that for years afterward had been their private joke. The song she sang under her breath whenever one of them was tired or sad or pretending not to be either. He stood very still. He told himself he was being foolish. There were 1,000 women in the city who knew that song. The world was full of coincidences that meant nothing. But then she shifted her weight to ease the pressure of the floor on her knees, and as she did, she tilted her head slightly to the right and reached up to touch the soft cartilage of her left ear with 2 fingers. A small, unconscious gesture. A thinking gesture. He had watched her do it 10,000 times in algebra class and on bus rides and in the hallway between periods. No one in the world did it but her. His chest went hollow. She looked up and noticed him standing there. Whatever she saw on his face, she misread completely because she scrambled to her feet with the awkwardness of late pregnancy and lowered her eyes and said very quickly, "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't realize anyone was awake. I'll be out of your way in just a minute." She did not recognize him. 16 years and a tailored shirt and the weight of a life he had built on top of the boy she had known, all of it had erased him from her sight. He opened his mouth to say her name. Nothing came out. His training, the discipline of 2 decades, took over for him before his heart could betray him. He heard his own voice, calm, professional, the voice he used on conference calls, say, "It's all right, take your time." He turned and walked back the way he had come up the stairs into his study and shut the door behind him. He sat down at his desk and put his hands flat on the wood to keep them from shaking. Naomi was downstairs. Naomi was downstairs cleaning his floor at 2 in the morning, 8 months pregnant with a bruise on her wrist. Sleep did not come. He sat in his desk chair until the sky outside the window turned the color of weak coffee, and then he got up and went to find Margaret. Margaret had been with him for almost 2 years. She was in her early 60s, white, with the practical kindness of a woman who had once worn other uniforms before this one. He found her in the kitchen, as he always did at 6 in the morning, setting the coffee maker. She moved through the small ritual with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had spent decades in jobs that did not allow for hesitation, and most days he barely noticed it. Today, for some reason, he did. He kept his voice even. "The night cleaner. The pregnant one. How long has she been working here?" Margaret looked up, surprised. "About 4 months, sir. Crestline rotates their staff, but she's asked to keep this property since she started. Why, is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong. I'd like to see her file." Margaret brought him the folder 20 minutes later, and he took it back upstairs and closed the door of his study again before he opened it. The first page was a photocopy of a state ID. The face in the photo was older and thinner than he remembered, but it was unmistakably hers. The name on the ID read Naomi Carter, and seeing it printed there in plain black ink did something to his throat he did not have a word for. The application listed her current address as a rented room on the east side of the city, in a neighborhood he knew was rough and getting rougher. She had requested night shifts. The notes section, written in some Crestline manager's bored handwriting, said only, "Reliable, quiet, prefers to work alone, asked specifically not to be reassigned." He read it 3 times. He understood slowly what he was looking at. She had asked for the night shift because the pay differential was higher and because no one looked at a cleaner at 2 in the morning. She had asked to stay on this property because Crestline did not give cleaners the names of their clients. The file in front of her on her end listed his estate only as Property B17. She did not know whose floor she was scrubbing. She had spent the last 4 months walking through the rooms of a man who had spent 10 years looking for her, and neither of them had known. He sat there with the folder open on his lap and did the math. She had been living the whole time 20 minutes from his front door. It was not a romantic discovery. It was an indictment. All the money he had spent, all the search firms, all the late nights typing variations of her name into databases, and she had been here, working 2 jobs probably, paying rent in cash, carrying a child, hiding from something or someone, and hiding well enough that even a man with his resources had walked past her existence for years. He closed the folder and set it on the desk and looked at his hands. There were 2 ways to handle this. He knew them both before he had finished thinking the question. He could keep his distance. He could be the professional employer he was supposed to be, increase her hours quietly, raise her pay through Crestline, make sure her shifts were easy, and never let her know he had recognized her. It would be the cleanest option. She had clearly built a life fragile as it was that did not include him. Walking back into it uninvited was its own kind of violence. He had no right to assume she would want to see him. He had no right to assume she had ever thought of him at all. The other option was to walk back down those stairs tomorrow night and call her by her name. He sat with it for a long time. Outside the window, the sky kept lightening. He thought about the bruise on her wrist. He thought about the way she had flinched the practiced apology, the lowered eyes. He thought about a girl who had once stood in front of their high school choir and sung loud enough to make the back row laugh, and he tried to fit that girl into the shape of the woman on his foyer floor, and the gap between the two pictures was the thing that finally broke him open. He did not decide that morning. He chose instead a third path, the one that men like him always chose first, because it felt safer than either of the others. He would find out more before he acted. He would learn what he could about her circumstances quietly without revealing himself. He would give himself a few days to think. He told himself it was the responsible choice. He told himself he was protecting her by going slowly. What he did not tell himself, because he was not yet ready to say, it was that he was afraid. Afraid that if he spoke her name out loud and she lifted her head and looked at him without recognition a second time, the loss would be larger than he could survive twice in one lifetime. There is a thing the world does not often say out loud. It is this: there are people working right in front of us every day whose lives we know nothing about. The man who delivers the package, the woman who wipes down the table at the diner, the cleaner who comes after the office empties. We see the uniform and we do not see the person inside it, and most of the time, the person inside the uniform prefers it that way because being unseen is sometimes the only protection a tired body has left. A uniform can hide a college degree that was never finished. It can hide a child waiting at home. It can hide a bruise. It can hide a whole life that was once supposed to go somewhere else. The distance between two human beings is rarely measured in miles. It is measured in who is willing to look up and who is willing to be seen. Ethan sat at his desk until the sun came over the eastern ridge and put a pale rectangle of light on the carpet. He did not know yet what he was going to do. He only knew that something in his life had changed at 2 in the morning and was not going to change back. Sometimes kindness begins very small. Sometimes it begins with the simple decision to look more closely at the tiredness of another person instead of walking past. He waited one full day before he went back down to the foyer. He told himself it was patience. It was not. It was the simple animal need to be sure of his own voice before he used it. The next night he was downstairs at 1:45, standing near the base of the staircase with the lights dimmed low. He had told Margaret to take the evening off. He wanted no audience for this, including his own staff. Naomi came in through the side entrance the way the cleaning crew always did, a key card in one hand and her bucket in the other. She did not see him at first. She set her supplies down on the runner and pressed a hand to the small of her back and exhaled the kind of long, careful breath that pregnant women learn to take when no one is watching. Then she turned toward the stairs and stopped. He stepped forward into the soft pool of light from the chandelier so she could see his face. Naomi. He had not spoken her name out loud in 16 years. The shape of it in his mouth surprised him. She went very still. Her eyes moved over his features the way a person reads a letter in a language they use to know slowly from the top of the page down. He watched the recognition build in her layer by layer, and he watched her body try to refuse it. "Lean on me," he said quietly, "when you're not strong." Her hand went to her mouth. The sound that came out of her was not quite a word. She took one step back and then another, and her shoulder met the wall behind her, and she stayed there, as if the wall were the only thing keeping her upright. "Ethan." "Yeah, it's me." She closed her eyes. Tears came down her face without any of the usual preliminaries. No build-up, no shaking, just the steady arrival of something that had been waiting a long time. She did not wipe them. He took half a step toward her and then stopped because something in her posture told him to. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry I can't be here right now. I can't do this right now." "Naomi, please." She bent down to pick up her bucket, and her hand was shaking so badly that the handle clattered against the metal rim. She did not look at him again. She walked back out the side entrance the way she had come in, and the door clicked shut behind her with the soft, expensive sound of a lock that cost more than her month's rent. He stood in the foyer for a long time after she left. He had imagined in the hours leading up to this a dozen versions of how she might react. He had not imagined this one. He had not understood until he saw her face that the thing standing between them now was not distance or time. It was shame. She did not want him to see her like this. She did not want the boy who had once believed she was going to be a teacher to look at the woman she had become and do the math. He went back upstairs and did not sleep. In the morning, before Margaret arrived, he wrote down the address from her file and drove himself across the city. The building was a 3-story walk-up, the color of old teeth, with a security door that had not latched properly in years. He climbed to the second floor and stood outside the door of apartment 207 and listened. He could hear nothing. He raised his hand to knock and lowered it again. She would not open the door. He knew that before he tried. Whatever shame had walked her out of his foyer last night was not going to let her walk back through it this morning. He took the letter out of the inside pocket of his jacket. The same letter. The paper had softened at the folds from 16 years of being carried. The ink had not faded as much as he had expected it to. He had reread it perhaps 6 times in all those years on bad nights, the way other men reread the obituaries of people they had once known. He slid it under her door. Then he went back to his car and drove home and did not let himself check his phone for the rest of the day. She came that night, not in her uniform. In jeans and a loose sweater that did not quite hide the shape of her and a coat that was thinner than the weather called for. Margaret showed her into the kitchen and quietly disappeared. He had food on the table, not a meal exactly, just bread and butter and slices of pear and a pot of tea, because he had not known what she could keep down at this stage, and he had wanted there to be something between them other than the air. She sat down across from him and put her hands flat on the wood the same way he had put his hands on his desk that first morning. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "I read the letter." "Okay. I didn't know." "I know you didn't." She looked up at him then for the first time without flinching. Her eyes were red but dry. "Ethan, I owe you the long version or none of it. Tell me which one you want." "The long one." So she told him. She told him about her father, the gambling debts no one had known about the morning the federal agents had come, the way her mother had aged 10 years between breakfast and dinner. She told him about her aunt's house in another state, a small back bedroom with a window that faced a brick wall, and the 3 years it had taken her mother to die of something the doctors kept renaming. She told him she had started college on a scholarship and dropped out in the middle of her second year to take a full-time job because grief and rent did not agree on a schedule. She told him about Calvin Reed. She had met him 6 years ago at a coffee shop where she was working the morning shift. He had been polite, then attentive, then steady. He had a job and a car and a way of making the future sound like a thing she could lean against. For the first 18 months, it had been the closest thing to safety she had felt since her mother died. She had not noticed at first the way he kept track of her schedule. She had not noticed the way her old friends stopped calling. By the time she noticed, she was living in his apartment and her name was on a lease she could not afford alone. The first time he hit her, he cried about it for an hour afterward. The second time, he did not cry. By the 5th time, she had learned the geography of which rooms in the apartment had no neighbors on the other side of the wall. She had stayed. She wanted him to know that because she was not going to lie to him about any of it. She had stayed, and she did not have a clean explanation for why. Some of it was money. Some of it was tiredness. Some of it was the slow, corrosive belief that this was what her life was now, and that wanting more from it was a kind of vanity she had not earned. She had found out she was pregnant at 4 months, which was late, because her cycle had been irregular for years from stress. The same week she found out, she had also found out 2 other things. The first was that Calvin had been seeing another woman the entire time they had been together. The second was that there had been a woman before her 3 years before whom he had put in the hospital. Naomi had found the woman's name in an old text thread on his second phone. She had called the woman from a payphone outside a gas station, and the woman had told her quietly and without dramatics what to expect. That night she had told Calvin she was leaving. He had pushed her into the bedroom wall. The bruise on her wrist was not from that night. It was from a week later when he caught her at the door with a packed bag. She had gotten out anyway because the woman on the phone had told her exactly which mistakes not to make, and Naomi had listened. "He's not on anything," she said. "We were never married. He's not on the lease of where I'm living now. His name isn't going on the birth certificate. But he can file to establish paternity after she's born, and his lawyer has already sent me a letter saying he intends to. He doesn't want her, Ethan. He wants a leash. He wants something he can pull on whenever I try to walk further away." She stopped and looked down at her hands. "She's his, the baby. I won't lie to you about that either. I needed you to know before anything else." He had been listening without moving for most of an hour. He did not move now. "Naomi?" "Yeah. I have been carrying that letter since I was 17. The corner of her mouth moved, not a smile exactly, but something underneath one. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I know, I read it twice. I looked for you. I figured when I read it. I'm sorry." "Don't." They sat with it. Outside the kitchen window, the sky had gone the deep blue of very late evening. He thought about 100 things he could say and discarded all of them. What he finally said was, "There's a guest house on the property. It has its own entrance, its own kitchen, its own everything. I want you to move in until the baby's here and you've had time to figure out what you want next. I'll have Margaret nearby. The security on the property is good. He won't get to you here." She let him finish. Then she shook her head slowly and said the thing he was not expecting. "No." He did not argue. He waited. "I'm not doing this again, Ethan. I'm not moving into a man's house and letting him decide what's safe for me. I did that once. I know what it costs. This isn't—" "I know it isn't. I know you. That's why I'm telling you the truth instead of just saying yes." She drew a breath that was not entirely steady. "I'll come, but there are conditions. I keep working not the night shifts I'll move 2 days until the baby comes. I pay you rent. Whatever's fair for the guest house, you tell me I pay it. Maybe not all of it now, but I'll write you an IOU for the rest, and I'll pay it. And you don't make a single decision about me or about her without asking me first. Not what doctor I see, not what stroller you buy, not whether I press charges, none of it. If I'm going to live on your property, I live there as a person, not as a guest. Are those terms you can live with?" He looked at her for a long moment. 16 years had not changed the part of her he had loved most. She had always been the one with the spine. "Yes," he said. "Those are terms I can live with." Then okay. She moved in 3 days later with 2 duffel bags and a paper grocery sack of things for the baby. She set her own schedule. She paid her rent in cash on the 1st of the month. She refused the meals Margaret offered to make for her and cooked her own until the 3rd week when Margaret started leaving extra portions on the counter without comment and Naomi started eating them without comment. And somehow that became the way they got along. There is a thing people say about women who stay too long with men who hurt them, and the thing they say is almost never right. They say, why didn't she leave, as if leaving were a single act, a door you walk through once. It is not. Leaving is 100 small decisions taken over weeks and months and sometimes years. It is the morning you put a single change of clothes in a bag and slide the bag under the bed. It is the afternoon you save a phone number for a women's shelter into your contacts under a fake name. It is the night you photograph a bruise you have not yet decided what to do with. Most people who finally walk out the door have been walking out in increments for a very long time. And many relationships do not end because love runs out. They end because both people went silent at the exact moment when one of them needed to be told the truth out loud. She had been at the guest house for almost 2 weeks when she went to the supermarket on her own. It was a Saturday afternoon. She had refused the driver Ethan had quietly offered. She was 36 weeks along and she wanted for 1 hour to be a woman in a grocery store and not a woman in a story. She parked near the back of the lot and went in and bought small things, a package of newborn onesies, a jar of pickles she had been wanting for 3 days, a bag of apples. She came out with 2 light bags and walked to her car. He was leaning against the driver's side door. Calvin Reed did not look the way the men in television shows about domestic violence look. He was clean-shaven and unremarkable in a navy jacket, the kind of face you would forget in a crowd of 3. His voice when he spoke was lower than she remembered and softer as if he were trying not to startle a horse. Naomi. She stopped. The bags hung from her hands. The parking lot was half full and there were people within shouting distance, and she made herself notice this because old reflexes were already starting to take over and tell her to go quiet, go small, get through it. "You look good," Calvin said. "Pregnancy suits you." She did not answer. "I know where you're staying," he said in the same gentle tone. He recited the address of the estate. He named the road. He named the gate number. She would later realize he had probably gotten all of it by following a delivery truck up the hill one afternoon and watching where it turned in. "I know who he is. The black guy with the company. I read about him." She still did not answer. Her free hand had moved into her coat pocket. Her fingers found her phone. "That baby," Calvin said, "is mine. You can dress it up in whatever new life you want. You can have your boyfriend buy it whatever he wants. But when she's born, I'll be there. The law is the law. You and I both know that." She brought the phone out of her pocket. She did not say a word to him. She lifted it, opened the camera, switched it to video, and pointed it at his face. He blinked. A small, surprised tightening went through his jaw. "Naomi." "Say it again," she said. Her voice was not loud. It was perfectly even. "Say all of it again, and look at the camera while you do." He took one step back from the car. "You're recording me?" "Yes." "That's..." "Say it again, Calvin, or get out of my way." He did neither. He stood there for another 4 or 5 seconds, calculating, and then he turned and walked across the parking lot toward a gray sedan she did not recognize. She kept the phone on him until he got in and drove off. She wrote down the license plate on the back of her receipt with a hand that was by then finally allowed to shake. She did not call Ethan. She drove herself slowly and carefully to the police precinct on the west side of downtown, and she sat in the waiting area for an hour and 40 minutes until a detective could see her, and she gave the detective the video and the photographs of older bruises she had been keeping in a private folder on her phone for a year and a half, and the name and number of the woman from 3 years ago who had told her on a payphone what to expect. She filed for a temporary restraining order. She did all of it alone. She told Ethan that night in the kitchen after she had eaten. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. When he spoke, his voice came out tighter than he meant it to. "You should have called me." "I know that's how you feel." "Naomi, he was at your car." "I know," she said. "What if he had..." "He didn't," she said firmly before he could finish. He put his hand flat on the table and pressed down hard the way he used to do at his desk when he was trying not to say the first thing that came into his mouth. "I am not trying to control you," he said carefully. "I am trying to tell you that I was scared. I am scared right now. I am still scared sitting here even though it's already over." She reached across the table and put her hand on his wrist, which was the first time she had touched him on purpose since the night in the foyer. "I don't need you to solve my life, Ethan," she said. "I need you to be next to me while I solve it. Those are 2 different things, and the second one is harder. I know that." He nodded. He did not say anything else for a while because there was nothing to say that would not make him smaller than he wanted to be in that moment. He just turned his wrist under her hand until his palm was up and her fingers were resting in his, and they sat like that until the kitchen clock turned over to a new hour. The temporary restraining order was granted 3 days later. The lawyer Ethan retained told them in a careful voice that this was the easy part. Calvin had a clean record on paper and a quiet manner in court, and men like that were good at making themselves look reasonable to judges. They would need every piece of evidence Naomi had gathered. They would need patience. They would need not to make any mistakes. Calvin made the first one for them. A morning came when Margaret found a plain white envelope wedged under the gate of the service entrance. No stamp, no address. Just Naomi written across the front in careful block letters. Inside were 3 photographs. Naomi in the back garden of the estate in her coat, walking slowly along the path between the rose beds. Naomi from another angle sitting on the bench by the fountain. Naomi with her hand on the small of her back, her face turned toward the house. All 3 taken from somewhere outside the fence with a long lens the previous afternoon. He had crossed the property line, or he had paid someone to. He had been close enough to see her face. That same night, the worst storm of the year came in off the coast. The rain started at 6, and by 10 it was falling in sheets that turned the long private road into a river. A pair of old oaks went down across the lane between the gate and the highway. The power flickered, came back, flickered again. Naomi's contractions started at 11:42 weeks earlier than the doctor had told her to expect. They were close together from the first one. By midnight, she was on the bed in the guest house with her hand fisted in Margaret's sleeve, breathing through gritted teeth. Ethan called for an ambulance at 12:06. The dispatcher told him in a voice that was already apologizing that no vehicle could reach the estate for at least 90 minutes, possibly longer. The trees were across the road in 2 places the city was triaging calls, and the lower neighborhoods were already flooding. He stood in the hallway of the guest house with the phone in his hand and felt something inside his chest go very cold and very still. Margaret took the phone gently out of his fingers and set it down on the side table. She looked at him with the steady, unsentimental face of a woman who had spent 20 years as a labor and delivery nurse before she ever picked up a feather duster. "I have caught more than 300 babies in my life," she said. "But I am 62 years old and my hands are not as fast as they used to be. I am going to need a second pair. Are you ready?" When the storm comes, calm saves more than fury ever has. And sometimes the person who saves you is not the one you expected. Sometimes it is the person who has been walking through your house every day for 2 years, whose face you barely looked at, whose whole life you never bothered to learn. There is a truth that is hard to say out loud, and it is this. Walking out of a house that is not safe is almost never a single decision. It is 100 small ones made on 100 ordinary days by a person nobody is watching. It is the single change of clothes folded into the back of a drawer. It is the phone number saved under a false name. It is the photograph of a wrist taken in a bathroom mirror with the door locked, kept for a reason the woman who took it does not yet have. It is the call placed and hung up 3 times before it goes through. It is the bag carried out the door at 2 in the morning to nowhere in particular. If anyone listening tonight is in a house that is not safe, this is not a story telling you to be brave. You are already brave. The fact that you are still here is the proof. What you need is not more strength. What you need is one more small decision, and then one after that. Sometimes walking out a door is a single step, but it has to be your own. The lights went out at 12:20. They had been flickering for an hour, and then they were gone for good. Margaret was already moving before the room finished going dark. She pulled a flashlight out of her own coat pocket without breaking stride, and she told Ethan in the same calm voice she used when she was asking him whether he wanted eggs to bring every candle in the house, and the box of clean towels from the linen closet on the 2nd floor, and the kettle from the kitchen full set on the gas stove which still worked. He went. He came back. He went again. Margaret had stripped the bed down to a single fitted sheet and was washing her hands at the bathroom sink with the slow, methodical thoroughness of a woman who had done it 10,000 times. Naomi was on the bed on her side knees, drawn up as far as her body would allow, breathing through a contraction with her eyes squeezed shut. Her hair had come loose from its tie. There was sweat at her temples already. "How far apart?" Margaret asked, drying her hands. 3 minutes. Naomi said through her teeth. "Maybe less." "All right. That's all right. That's where we want to be." Margaret moved with an economy that did not allow room for fear. She had Ethan light the candles and arrange them on the dresser and the bedside table so that the room glowed instead of flickered. She had him set the kettle to a low boil and bring it back. She had him wash his hands all the way to the elbows twice the second time while she watched. She had him take his shirt off and put on one of the clean white kitchen aprons folded in the linen closet because she said blood does not come out of a good shirt, and there was no point in pretending this was going to be tidy. Then she sat down on the bed beside Naomi and put one hand on her shoulder. "Look at me, honey." Naomi opened her eyes. "You are going to do this," Margaret said. "Your body knows how. My job tonight is to catch. His job is to do whatever I tell him to do. Your job is to listen to your body and push when it says push. Are we agreed?" Naomi nodded. "Say it out loud, sweetheart. I need to hear it." "We're agreed." "Good girl." The next 40 minutes were the longest of Ethan's life, and the shortest of his life both at once. The rain hammered against the windows in long sheets. The wind found a loose shutter somewhere on the east side of the house and rattled it like something trying to get in. Naomi's contractions came faster, then faster still. Margaret talked to her the entire time, not soothing nonsense, but a steady, practical narration of what was happening inside her own body, what each new wave meant, what to expect from the next one. She had Ethan kneel on the other side of the bed and hold Naomi's hand, and she told him, without looking up, that his only job in that moment was not to let go. He did not let go. Naomi gripped his fingers hard enough that he felt the bones move against each other. He did not flinch. At one point, between contractions, she opened her eyes and looked at him, and her face was so wet with sweat and tears that he could not tell which was which, and she said very quietly, "Look at me. You're not allowed to shake. I'm the one who gets to shake tonight." He laughed. He had not intended to laugh, and once he had started, he had to put his free hand over his mouth to stop, because if he laughed anymore, he was going to cry, and Margaret was going to lose her unflappable medical face, and the whole room was going to come apart at the seams. "Okay," he said. "Okay, you shake. I'll hold. That's the deal?" "That's the deal." Around 12:50, Margaret's voice changed. It did not get louder. It got more specific. She told Naomi to push and to stop and to push again, and Naomi did, and somewhere in the middle of it, Margaret said very evenly, "Cord, hold a moment, sweetheart. Don't push, Naomi, look at me." Naomi looked. "Just breathe, in and out. Keep going, eyes on me." Margaret's hands were doing something Ethan could not see and did not at that moment want to see. He kept his eyes on Naomi's face. He counted the seconds in his head because he needed to be counting something. He got to 19. "There," Margaret said in the same even voice. "All right. Push, sweetheart. Now, push." Naomi pushed. The cry came at 12:56 in the morning in a candle-lit bedroom in the middle of a storm with the power out and the road blocked and an ambulance still 40 minutes away. It was a small, outraged, beautifully ordinary cry, and it filled the room more completely than any sound Ethan had ever heard. A girl, 6 pounds, 2 ounces, small but with lungs that did not know they were small. Margaret cleaned her with quick, competent hands and wrapped her in one of the warm towels Ethan had brought up and laid her on Naomi's bare chest, skin to skin, the way Naomi's body was already asking for. Naomi's arms came up and folded around her without any thought at all. The crying slowed. The baby's small fist found its way to its own mouth and stayed there. Ethan slid down off the edge of the bed and sat on the floor with his back against the bed frame because his legs would not hold him anymore. He was crying. He did not realize for almost a full minute that he was crying. When he did not try to stop. Margaret looked at him over the top of the bed, and her eyes were wet too, and she did not say anything. She just nodded at him once the way one professional nods at another after a long shift. There is a thing nobody says often enough to men like Ethan Brooks. It is this: being allowed to shake is its own kind of freedom. He had spent his whole life being told in 1,000 small ways that a black man in America who wanted to be taken seriously had to be calmer than the room, steadier than the room, never the first one to flinch. He had built a company on that discipline. He had built a public face on that discipline. He had built a private life so quiet around that discipline that there was barely any room left in it for him. But on this night, in this candlelit room, his hands had shaken so badly that he could not have held a cup of water without spilling it. And it was not weakness. It was the first time in many years that he had been allowed to be for 1 hour simply a human being, not a symbol, not a success story, not a piece of evidence somebody was going to point at later as proof of something. The bravest thing a man can sometimes do is not stand tall. It is to kneel down beside the person he loves and admit out loud that he does not know what he is doing, but that he is here, and he is staying, and that is the only promise he can keep. The ambulance arrived at 1:47 when the rain was finally easing. Margaret met the paramedics at the door and gave them in the brisk shorthand of one professional to another the full account time of delivery weight condition of mother and child, the cord intervention, the absence of complications since. The lead paramedic listened, made a few notes, and told them quietly that both of them would be taken in for a full workup. Standard procedure for any unattended home delivery, he said. 3 days minimum longer if anything came up on the blood work. Naomi nodded. She did not have the energy to argue, and she was not going to argue. She wanted Hope checked by every machine the hospital owned. Ethan rode in the ambulance with them. Margaret stayed behind to clean the room because she said with a small, dry smile that she had not let anyone else strip her birthing rooms in 20 years, and she was not going to start now. In the hospital room on the morning of the second day after the nurses had stopped coming in every 10 minutes, Naomi looked down at the small, sleeping shape against her shoulder and said without looking up, "I want to call her Hope." Ethan was sitting in the chair beside the bed. He had not gone home since they arrived. "Hope," he said. "Not because the word is pretty. I know the word is pretty. That's not why. Tell me why." She was quiet for a moment, watching the baby's chest rise and fall. "When the contractions started in the storm," she said, "and the lights went out and you were on the phone with the dispatcher and I heard her say 90 minutes for about 30 seconds. I thought I was going to lose her. Right there. In that bed. I thought I had walked all the way out of that man's apartment and through 4 months of night shifts and across a parking lot with a phone in my hand, and I was going to lose her anyway. And I realized in the middle of that 30 seconds that I had not let myself hope for anything in a really long time. Not college, not love, not even her all the months I was carrying her. I had taught myself not to. Hoping had gotten too expensive." She lifted her eyes to his. "She is the first thing in years I have allowed myself to hope for. So that's her name, because of what she made me remember how to do." He did not answer for a long time. Then he reached over and put the back of one finger very gently against the soft, warm side of the baby's cheek. "Hope," he said. "Welcome." On the afternoon of the third day, Calvin Reed walked into the hospital lobby and asked at the front desk to see Naomi Carter. He had dressed for the occasion, a clean button-down shirt, a haircut, no visible signs of strain. He told the receptionist in the same low, reasonable voice he had used in the supermarket parking lot that he was the father of the child upstairs and that he was here to meet his daughter. He had practiced the sentence. It came out smoothly. What he did not know was that Ethan had spent the last 72 hours preparing for exactly this moment. The lawyer Ethan had retained had been working in shifts since the night of the storm building a file. Photographs of the bruises Naomi had documented over the previous year and a half. The hospital records of the woman from 3 years ago obtained with her written permission. 2 other witnesses she had named who were now willing to give statements. The video Naomi had recorded in the parking lot. The license plate and registration of the gray sedan. The estate's perimeter security footage from the afternoon before the storm, which had captured a figure with a long lens crouching just outside the eastern fence line for nearly 40 minutes. A figure whose build and gait the security firm had concluded matched Calvin Reed at a probability the lawyer was prepared to call near certainty in court. The temporary restraining order itself, granted in writing, served on Calvin 5 days earlier, with a clause that prohibited him from coming within 500 feet of Naomi or any facility she was known to be in. The hospital was such a facility. He had been informed of that in the order. He had walked into the lobby anyway. The receptionist had been briefed. She did not show any reaction at all to Calvin's name. She told him pleasantly that she would need a moment to verify visitation, and she picked up the phone and made a call that Calvin assumed was to the patient's room. It was not. 2 officers from the city police department had been waiting in a side office on the 2nd floor since the morning after a quiet phone call from the lawyer to a contact in the precinct. Ethan came down the elevator alone. He met Calvin in the lobby. He did not bring his lawyer. He did not bring security. He brought instead a single manila folder under his arm, and he set it on the low table between 2 waiting room chairs and gestured for Calvin to sit. "I'm not going to fight you in here," Ethan said quietly. "I'm not going to raise my voice. I'm not going to give you a story you can tell about the angry boyfriend later. So sit down." Something in Calvin's face thinned out. He sat. Ethan opened the folder. He turned it so that the contents faced Calvin. He did not narrate. He let the man read. Calvin read the first page. His jaw moved slightly. He read the second. He read the third. By the 5th page, the woman from 3 years ago, the hospital intake report, the photographs, his hand on the edge of the folder had gone still. "This is everything," Ethan said. "And this is not even the copy that's been filed. This is just the copy I wanted you to see with your own eyes before they put the cuffs on you. Because I needed you to understand something." He leaned forward just slightly and his voice went lower instead of louder. "You came here because you thought a baby would give you a leash. You thought that as long as a piece of paper somewhere said you were her father, you would have a reason to stay in Naomi's life forever. I want you to understand that you do not have that. Naomi did not put your name on the birth certificate. With this file, the chances of you being granted any form of visitation by a family court in this state are functionally 0. You are not going to be in that child's life. You are not going to be in Naomi's life. You are not going to be on the other side of a fence with a camera. You are going to be a man she knew once a long time ago, and you are going to have nothing of hers to hold." Calvin opened his mouth. Whatever he had been going to say did not arrive. His eyes flicked once toward the lobby doors. The 2 officers were already walking across the lobby. They did not run. They did not need to. One of them had Calvin's right wrist before Calvin had finished standing up. The arrest was quiet. There was almost no one in the lobby to notice. A woman with a vase of flowers looked up briefly and then looked back down at her phone. Ethan watched them walk Calvin out. He did not feel triumphant. He felt more than anything very tired and very clear. He went back upstairs. Naomi was awake when he came in. Hope was asleep against her shoulder. He sat down in the chair beside the bed and told her in plain words what had just happened in the lobby. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she nodded once and closed her eyes and did not open them again for almost a minute. When she did, she said, "Thank you." "You don't have to." "I know I don't. I'm saying it anyway. Once, and then I want you to listen to something." "Okay." She shifted Hope a little against her chest, and as she did, she lifted her free hand and without thinking about it, touched the soft cartilage of her left ear with 2 fingers, the same small thinking gesture that had given her away across a marble foyer at 2 in the morning. He saw it. He did not say anything about it. Some things after 16 years you were just allowed to keep. People are going to tell this story wrong, Ethan. They're going to tell it as the story of a rich man who saved a poor pregnant woman from a bad man. They're going to say I was lucky I met you. They're going to say I was lucky you were in that foyer at 2 in the morning. And every time someone tells it that way, a piece of what actually happened is going to disappear. She opened her eyes and looked at him. I left him. I packed the bag. I made the phone call to that woman from a payphone outside a gas station and asked her how to leave without dying. I worked nights for 4 months and paid my own rent. I stood in a parking lot with him 3 feet away from me and recorded his face instead of running. I went to the precinct alone. I told you no when you offered to put me up like a guest, and I told you what my terms were instead. You did not save me. You showed up. You stayed. Those are not the same thing, and I need you of all people to know the difference. Do you? He looked at her for a long moment. I know the difference. Good. She closed her eyes again. Hope made a small sleeping sound against her shoulder. There is something the story will not tell itself, and so it has to be said out loud. There is no prince in this story. There never was. There was a woman who on the worst night of her life walked out of a door with one bag and no plan. And there was a man who 16 years after losing her finally got the chance to sit beside her hospital bed and hold her hand. The first part is the story. The second part is the gift. They are not the same. They will never be the same. And if there is a woman somewhere listening to this who has been told again and again that she is waiting for someone to come and rescue her, she should know that the rescue she has been waiting for has been her all along, all this time, in every small decision she has made on every ordinary day. She does not need a prince. She needs her own self of tomorrow who will one day thank her own self of today for not giving up. By the time Hope was 6 months old, the spring had come back to the hills above the city. Naomi had enrolled in 2 classes toward finishing the teaching degree she had once in another life started. She had taken a part-time job at a branch of the public library down the hill 3 afternoons a week because she liked the smell of the building and she liked the children's reading hour, and she did not want any part of her life to come to her without her having earned it. She paid her own phone bill. She paid her own rent on the guest house in cash on the first of the month, exactly as she had promised. She and Ethan were not married. They were not engaged. They were learning each other slowly with the patience of 2 adults who had finally understood that love did not need to prove itself in a hurry. One afternoon in late April, Ethan came home early and found her on the side porch of the guest house with Hope asleep on her shoulder. She was rocking very slightly and humming, "Lean on me when you're not strong." He stood at the foot of the porch steps and listened for a long moment before she noticed him. When she did not stop humming. She just lifted her free hand and patted the seat of the wooden bench beside her. He climbed the steps and sat down. She leaned her head sideways onto his shoulder. Hope did not wake up. For the first time in 3 years, the estate at the top of the hill was not silent. There was a child breathing softly. There was a woman humming. There was a man who, after 34 years of being calm and composed and quiet, had finally found out what his house sounded like with people in it. Here is the thing you came for, and here is the thing that is true. Nobody is going to promise you that love will arrive on time. Nobody is going to promise you that the good people in your life will get back what they have given. Some of them never will. That is the part of the world we do not get to fix. But somewhere in every life, at least once a door opens a little. It might be a person walking through a foyer at 2 in the morning. It might be a phone call you almost did not make. It might be a decision you have been putting off for years. And the only question worth answering, not whether you deserve it, not whether you are ready, is this one. When the door opens, will you walk through? Naomi walked through. Ethan walked through. Both of them were afraid. Both of them were tired. Neither of them was sure of anything. What door in your own life has been quietly open for a long time, waiting for you to look at it?